Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. We're going to be talking leadership today with my good buddy Alan. He's worked with a lot of various tech companies, from Google to LinkedIn to Pinterest, and he has a lot to share about leadership as well as toxic work environments. So as you guys know, a lot of work environments can be toxic, especially in the healthcare field where I'm from. But in the tech space, they're doing a lot of things for, well, what did you actually do to help with this most toxic work environment?
Yeah, I was essentially in charge of making sure it was less toxic. Really? So the way to say it, I was head of learning and leadership development for a couple different companies. I led leadership development at Pinterest. I was head of learning and leadership development for Riot Games and Discord. And look, the tech space, and I did work at Google as well, it's tough and it's super competitive. And unfortunately, it's super competitive internally as well. What does this mean? It means that, look, there's a lack of what we refer to as psychological safety. And with psychological safety, it's a bit of a buzzword, right? So a lot of companies, they say, we want more psychological safety. What does it mean? It means essentially if you get things wrong, it's okay. You have a chance to learn.
Instead of just whoop-boom.
Yeah, instead of the whoop-boom. Absolutely. Instead of you're fired or you have to leave or we're never going to see you the same way again.
What are the big, clogs in the system that makes a toxic work environment?
Wow, that's a really good call. There's a lot of things. I think the competitive nature in general that you feel in a tech space is going to make things feel a little bit more toxic. So much is about leadership, right? It's how you are conditioning your people. It's really how you're speaking to your people. A big part is, too, even just kind of the goals that you set at your company. So if your goals are extremely aggressive, and there are some leaders who are going to push for really high goals, and unfortunately it's going to make their people feel the pain of that, where you can't push things back if things are too stressful, or if it's causing you to work nights, weekends, when you have these crazy goals.
Yeah, crazy deadlines too, yeah.
Yeah, but I think in general, that psychological safety element is super important. Again, when you feel this, you feel the ability of, it's okay if I get things wrong. It's also, you have the ability of being able to speak your voice and have people actioned upon it too. So it doesn't feel like I'm just contributing to something and it's falling on deaf ears.
Yeah.
And really, you have the ability of doing your best work when you're in that type of headspace because you're taking more risks. You're not afraid to do it wrong. And a big thing of the tech world is you have to do incredible things.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's just like the healthcare space. Right now, unprecedented amount of nurses are leaving bedside. They're just leaving the hospital to do cosmetics or, for example, Botox fillers, or even doing at-home stuff like home health and things like that. And one of the main reasons that I hear all the time, because I worked at the hospital over the course of 10 years, but even now we're seeing so many people leave, and because of the high workflows, the low amount of pay, as well as the demand for overtime. But not even that, a lot of hospital systems, this is what I hear a lot with nurses, it's like we don't feel appreciated enough. And most of it is because of the high workflows, the unsafe working conditions, because they're not even given enough supplies.
Yeah.
During COVID, they were only given, one mask, which I get it. There wasn't a lot of resources. One mask that you had to put in a paper bag. And it's like, that was only for, they're like, hey, just use this mask, put it in a paper bag for not even your whole shift, but usually for the whole week or the month, because they didn't know when the supplies were going to come.
Wow.
And so a lot of nurses felt like, we're being unsupported. And also, it was like the management doesn't really help out or listen to needs.
So it's a big one.
Yeah. What did you do, I guess, at Pinterest as well as these other tech companies, just to make sure that, what are the biggest ways to have management kind of step in and feel the needs of people?
Well, first, addressing what you just said, that's terrible.
Yeah.
These were our frontline workers. It's crazy they had to go through those conditions. And I think saving lives versus creating tech products and one is a little bit more important than the other. Yeah. Tech products.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding you. So I think part of it too is you have to understand what's going on, and you have to, do some data analysis. So a lot of the times organizations, they do these things called organizational health surveys, where they try to understand what the problem is. And a lot of times people say, hey, I feel stressed, I feel burnt out, things are difficult, I'm working all these crazy hours while a pandemic is going on, and it's taking me away from my family and my friends, and in doing so, my work performance is suffering. I want to understand, how I can maybe have a little bit more flexibility here. And so we hear these things, we see these surveys, we obviously do qualitative and quantitative analysis. So that's the quantitative. The qualitative is we're doing interviews. We're talking to people across the board. And I've done this on an internal level. I've also done it externally, which I do now as consulting. And, with this, once we identify what that issue is, then we try to find the right way to remedy it. So for instance, if it's people are feeling burnt out, which is kind of the consensus in these types of situations, well, what can we do to make people feel less burnt out? And a lot of it starts with leadership. So managers, how are you allocating work for your folks?
Do you feel like the managers are more resistant to change? Or does it have to come from the top down, or can it be implemented from the bottom up as well?
Yeah, usually top down. I mean, I don't want to say that's the end all be all, but most of the time you have to have your boss who's on board with it, who's giving you that flexibility to doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, look, a lot of times they're going to say, oh, yeah, bottom up, every individual contributor. And individual contributor, when I say this term, this just means somebody who doesn't have direct reports. They don't have employees, managers, they have people reporting in.
For example, like a nurse at a bedside,
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times tech companies say, hey, we empower everybody. You can do these things. And yeah, maybe sometimes you can. But for the most part, this has to come down from your boss. And to combat burnout, right, part of it too is just recognizing that something is off. And as leaders and as managers, what can you all do to make things better for your employees? Part of it is the way that you set goals, making sure that they are achievable and not too crazy. And also at the same time, how are you listening to what your employee is dealing with? And during the pandemic, hey, we all went through extremely challenging times, and you have to have an empathetic approach to leadership and really care and build relationships with your people so you know how to support them the best that you can.
Yeah. Or else they're just going to probably leave and have just huge vacancies.
I mean, when people do that.
Yeah, we're seeing it all the time.
Oh, yeah, well, the average shelf life at a tech company is about a year.
Really? 1 year?
Okay, so in the nurse community, though, I mean, look, this seems intense.
Yeah. In the nurse community, it's hard. I think, especially for new grads, they're hungry for new nurses.
Sure.
Because those with experience can leave the bedside. They can go anywhere. They were offering travel nursing at like $6,000 a week, sometimes $7,000 a week.
Wow.
To fill vacancies across the country, just because a lot of the people were leaving those community hospitals. And so they had to hire these staffing agencies to staff. And so the hospital's bleeding money. And now the nurses feel like, you know what? Okay, I'll put up with it, whatever you want, because I'm getting this money. But let's just talk to people. Let's say there's a career-minded person that is trying to climb the ladder.
Sure. And
their top management is not receptive or just really hard driver on these huge goals, ambitious goals. How can you implement change on the, on the bottom-up level if someone's watching?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a good call out. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's more challenging.
But is there any strategies?
So, yeah, absolutely. So I think part of it, too, is you're saying, hey, if a goal's coming down, what do you do to really push back on your boss if the goal is just too much? And I think part of that comes with the way that you push back. It's never just a no. It's a no and. So, for instance, if my boss is asking me to do too much, I might say, hey, I can do it, but at the same time, these are going to be some trade-offs. Meaning that if I have to focus on this project, these other things that are on my plate, I'm going to have to pivot. Or I can do this, but at the same time, I would recommend I hold off on doing it because these two other projects that I'm doing, they actually are going to have more of an impact to the company. An impact is the most important thing. And look, there are situations in this where your boss can still say, hey, no, I want you to do everything.
All of it.
Yeah. And in that situation, you could say, hey, look, these are the trade-offs. If I'm going to have to do this, this is the type of quality you're going to get. It's not going to be quite as great. And I think going on in the conversation, how can you truly impact change rather than just push back on your boss? I mean, part of it too is really just understanding what the overall organization is trying to do. If you're an employee, you have to understand that vision, and then you have to provide a method to get there. And maybe that method is different than what the organization is currently doing, but by doing that method, you're going to get there in a more innovative approach. And part of that too is having a manager who's open and receptive, who doesn't have an ego.
Yeah, that's the hardest part about not even corporate America, but any corporate structure, including the hospital or healthcare system.
Sure. Yeah. So in the nurse world, I guess, okay, that ego is prevalent. I mean, a lot of times you see doctors.
The God complex with the doctors.
I can make him walk again.
Let me walk on water and show you, like, what?
Yeah. So I guess in that environment, I would imagine, and this is even something I'm not sure, when a nurse is, in their role, who does the nurse report into? Is it a nurse supervisor? Is it a direct doctor?
Yeah. So it's very much so almost like just a regular company. So you have a floor manager, which is called the charge nurse. They're there to help out with any needs, make sure that they take care of clients or patients when someone goes to lunch. And then you also have the nurse floor manager, which is the epitome of like everyone. It's like Cruella de Vil. Everyone hates that person.
Why do they hate them?
It's not that they hate them, but it's more of like the most annoying person on the team.
Got it.
Just because they have to play the politician. Between the nurses, which is like, hey, I'm here for you guys. I'm on the front lines with you. But they're not really. They're inside the office, and they have to report to the corporate structure of the hospital. So, for example, it's like there's so many memes that go around where it's like, hey, have you updated your whiteboard? And there's a nurse doing chest compression trying to save someone's life. It's like the whiteboard is just to put the patient's name and why they're here.
And they're in the process.
Are you kidding me? I'm trying to prioritize right now.
Okay, so it kind of seems like there's a lot of frivolous tasks that are taking away from the main priorities.
Yeah. And then the other things are like, especially if you work night shift like I did, they make you come in for like mandatory in-service or like updates or classroom time. And so imagine if you're getting off shift on a regular day shift, like at 7 p.m.
Sure.
And then the class starts at midnight. That's kind of exactly what happens with night shifters. They get off at 7 a.m. and then they have a noon class. Wow. It's like, whoa, what the heck? So, and it's weird because they just expect you to do it.
Sure.
And which probably worked in the past with, bedroom nurses who are just willing to like, just strap it up and I'll just do whatever you need. But now these Gen Zers are coming in and it's like, F that. I'm not going to do that. And they're just like, I'll just rather do Botox. I'll rather do a travel nurse gig and not even have to deal with the hospital system.
Does that work?
Double X. Yeah. And that's happening a lot right now.
So they're changing the game.
There's almost 1 million nurses that they're in a deficit for. And nursing schools are turning people away.
Wow.
So the whole system's broken. And so that's why I wanted to start like my own nursing school.
Sure.
And go to the politician and say, hey, we want to give America 500,000 nurses with an online program. They'll still do clinicals in person, but we just need to remove some of this red tape. Let's just ramp it back up to where we're at in terms of the range of nurses we need. Then we can dissolve the program. And that's a proposition I really want to present to politicians. So if you're watching this and you make laws, please let us help the world.
Do it and elect him as president.
Yes, there you go.
A very fun world.
I don't know. I don't want to be a student.
Okay, elect me then. All right. So let's do it.
So what you're saying is from the bottom level, and it's very much so like the healthcare field.
Wait, go back to nurses. So telling me, if based upon what you said, that is a tough system.
It's a very
so you have people who are trying to essentially save lives, and the example you mentioned is chest compressions, and at the same time they're saying, oh, hey, go fill out those forms.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this, actually. If you could wave a magic wand and you could change one thing about the nursing field right now, what would it be?
I think the biggest thing is showing the appreciation of who you are in the system. Because so many times it's almost like being a soldier on the front lines. You're living and dying for your your patients.
Okay.
And you're there saving someone's life, and you're really the only thing in between if the doctor's orders gets implemented or not. And so many times the manager comes in as like a clog in the system.
Sure.
So instead of being like a top-down approach, it's almost like I think at the root of it, nurses really just want to see a servant leader. So a manager that gets off their high horse and is on the front lines with them. Even if they are helping or not, I think there needs to be more float nurses, but it's a personnel thing right now. So it's like a catch-22. It's like we don't have the manpower and we need to get all these things done because the paperwork is like the lifeblood of a hospital system. So if I waved a magic wand, it would be more assistance on the floor for nurses. And honestly, it's a personnel thing because right now, the hospitals are so inundated. You have a bunch of clients or a bunch of patients. We call them clients now. And now you have a little nurses. And so now they're forcing you to do unsafe patient ratios. So instead of doing like 4 patients, sometimes they're requiring 5 or 6 in some states. And sometimes they'll do 10. Yeah, it's like, well, you got to figure it out.
Missing things and it's not going so well sometimes.
And then it's like, not only are you overworked and understaffed, but here, let's put a Band-Aid on it by doing a pizza party.
Jeez, man.
I know. And they'll just give you pizza and they'll be like, hey, it's all better now.
I mean, I do like pizza.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so 2 things that you said that I think translate over really well. And you were saying, hey, if nurses felt more appreciation and there's not another clog in the system, another number, they'd perform better, right? And the other thing you mentioned is servant leadership.
Yeah.
Those 2 things, believe it or not, what I was talking about earlier, psychological safety, they actually inspire it. All right. So we found it. All right, so essentially when you feel appreciated, when you feel recognized for your work, what that does, it actually puts you in the state, what is it called? Your flow state.
Oh, the flow state. Yes, I've read a lot about this.
Yeah, so essentially flow state is, the best way to say it is, imagine you're having the best day ever. everything that you say at work is correct. Every client, every patient that you see, if a nurse, they're saying, hey, you're so amazing. The doctors are, giving you the high fives and everything, and you're in the tech environment, and you deliver amazing products. Your stakeholders, your colleagues, the people that are working with your boss, they're all just continuously giving you praise, saying that you are amazing at your job. Now, imagine if you do one thing wrong when you were in that headspace. How are you going to handle it?
Oh, it's just like, like water off a duck's back. It's like, okay, let's keep on moving, let's keep on flowing.
Flow away.
Yeah.
So essentially, when you were in that headspace, exactly that. You're more effective, and that's called your flow state. Now, flip the script.
Yeah.
Everything's going wrong. The patients are yelling, the doctor's yelling at you, your manager's telling you.
Down on you.
Yeah.
Where's your whiteboard at?
All the things. Yeah. If something goes wrong, it's a lot more detrimental to everything that's going on. So essentially, appreciation, positive feedback is huge. And a lot of the spaces that I work in is all about feedback. I work a lot with managers, executive leaders as well, with how do I give feedback to my people? And most of the time, leaders, they only give constructive feedback.
Oh, wow.
So they say, hey, I'm going to give you feedback when something goes wrong. This is why you suck. And that doesn't work because it actually puts you out of the flow state. The way to do it is actually provide more positive feedback than you do constructive feedback.
Okay.
And then you're even more receptive with constructive feedback because you realize, hey, it's something that I can get over.
Yeah.
I am actually, and now we're touching on something else, but have you ever heard of growth mindset?
No.
So growth mindset, it's written a book, literally Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. And Dweck talks about the idea of a growth versus fixed mindset. So a growth mindset, meaning, hey, if I do something wrong, it's okay because I'm not a finished product.
Right.
Essentially, I have the ability of learning and becoming a better version of myself.
Iterative. Keep on going.
Exactly.
2, 3, 4.0, 5.0.
5.0.
We're on iPhone 15 or 1,000 right now.
Yes, Android rules.
Okay, Daddy.
Anyways, so the other version is a fixed mindset. Fixed mindset, it means that I am a final product. And every time I do something wrong, it's my actual character. This is the best that I can be. So if you say I suck at podcasting, well, crap, I'm never going to get better.
I can see that. Okay, so that it's funny because a lot of people have that fixed mindset. I would say in the nursing field because a lot of the healthcare system is like old and crusty, and everyone in there doesn't want to change.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing to growth is adaptation, just like as we see in the environment and the ecosystem.
Yeah, and on the note of growth too, you were also talking about, hey, servant leadership.
Yeah.
Right? So part of that too is when you have managers who don't have certain servant leadership and the employees are doing all the work, the employees notice that. And same sort of situation with the nurses. I'm imagining if you have, the nurse who's essentially running the show, the one that you mentioned is Cruella DeVille, and she's not actually getting her hands dirty and actually helping and doing that. People are just going to say, hey, you're sitting in your ivory tower, you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
I lose respect. I don't want to push as hard as I can for you because you're not doing it. Yeah. Now, the problem I think that a lot of leaders have is sometimes they overcorrect. So you mentioned servant leadership, and we mentioned military terms as well. They have two things in military. You say you lead from the front. There's different ways to lead, but a lot of the same is lead from the front, lead from the rear. You want to be a leader who leads from the front. Now, challenge with this is that actually isn't correct. Sometimes you want to lead from the front. Sometimes you want to lead from the back. And one of my favorite leadership gurus, you could say, is somebody named Jocko Willink. He wrote a book called The Dichotomy of Leadership, and he talks about this.
He was on Joe Rogan.
He was on Joe Rogan, has his own podcast. That's great, too. But essentially, he talks about, look, it's never a perfect amount. What really makes an effective leader is that you go with the flow, right?
Okay.
And a lot of times, different people need more. So let's say you have an employee and they're struggling. Maybe that's somebody you need to lead with the front with, and you have to do an unpopular term, which is micromanagement.
Okay.
Then you have an all-star, and maybe you could take a step back. And micromanagement in that situation would only frustrate the employee. And I'd imagine in the nurse world, obviously it's the same thing. You have the nurses that are flying.
Nurses that are flying, and especially the new grads who are just like, they've never worked in a hospital system. They're just thrown in the deep end, and they're kind of like, kind of dragging down the unit. And I feel like a lot of other nurses like bully up on them by saying like, you're causing us to be more, have to do your work as well.
Sure.
But yeah, I can see the nurse manager kind of coming in outside of the office, outside of the ivory tower, and really kind of mentoring at that point, or putting nurses together that they could mentor and kind of working the team that way.
So does that happen often?
I have heard of really good nurse managers that have actually done that, and it's almost like a basketball team, right? Like most times coaches are just on the sidelines, either yelling or like the Lakers coach was just, Phil Jackson just sitting down, like more meditative. But yeah, I think some of the greatest nurse managers have actually come in and saying, hey, you know what? We're going to pair this nurse who's very experienced and really good teacher with some of these new nurses.
Okay.
And even after their preceptorship, it's like, hey, if you need something, go to these nurses instead of the old crusty ones or the ones that don't want to offer help.
Got it.
But also creating that culture of like, hey, guys, we're here on this together.
Sure.
And just setting that tone, which I think should come from upper management and leadership.
See, and that's a tough thing. I mean, look, I'm not going to say which companies, but I've been in situations where essentially, top leadership was pushing hard on my boss.
Drop the name. No.
No, and because of that, it was felt. It was felt, among our team as well. And so much of it has to start with the top. So, if you're a leader and you're in a situation where your boss is just giving you a hard time consistently, the worst thing you can do is to reflect that back on your people. What you have to do is take that in and redirect the comments that your boss gave you. And really, even if they're reaming you, they're reaming your team, you have to think about what is the outcome that you want for your team. And if the outcome is you want your team to perform better, it's not going to help them if you really belittle them and make them feel terrible about what they're doing and you scare them. I shouldn't say it won't help. Wouldn't help everybody. There are certain people who do well with that feedback, but majority of people, they don't. Majority of feedback is, hey, work with me collaboratively. Talk to me like a human. Tell me how you're going to get there. And, I think it's something that can sometimes be a lost art. And on the concept of nursing managers, I guess you're mentioning the ones that are good, that train other people. I guess, what is the difference between a good nursing manager and a bad one? And I think, training is an element there that you're mentioning.
Yeah, and honestly, just like you said, the great communication. So if someone has to reprimand you or they want you to get better, right? They have these things called... I think it was called PIPs.
We have those performance improvement plans.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And before you get there, it was like, hey, let me lead you in by a good, bad, good sandwich, where it's like, this is what you're doing good. Here's what you need to improve on.
Shit sandwich.
Yeah. And then end with something good, where it's like, I want you to do these things to improve on that. And then also using a collaborative approach, where like, hey, I see you struggling in this area. I want you to go to this nurse. Just in case you have any questions, or here's what you should reach out to.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
So essentially, they're giving them almost, we see in tech, the onboarding buddy.
Yeah, onboarding buddy.
So when you're starting, you have your onboarding buddy. And what I actually would recommend to companies when we were in that remote environment completely, you have two onboarding buddies, somebody on your team and somebody you work cross-functionally with.
Okay.
So if it was a nurse, you might have an onboarding buddy that's a nurse and maybe someone who's a doctor.
Oh, wow.
And then you could, I don't know, do you think that might be beneficial for a nurse?
I mean, in the nursing field, it really depends on where you work, but I think that the nurses themselves, especially in the hospital, it's like 80% of the entire staff of a hospital setting.
Yeah.
It's like the backbone. The hardest part about being a new nurse is talking to doctors.
Okay.
It's like, they already have this God complex. It's like even bigger than any ivory tower. You'd be like Everest. It's like, and then some doctors are really rude.
Okay.
So before calling them, they'll usually ask another colleague, like, hey, it's the first time calling this doctor, and they'll give them the heads up. Like, oh, this doctor's cool, this doctor, watch out. And you want to be A, B, and C. But it's hard when you don't know the resources to reach out to. You don't know which nurses to ask. And as a manager, I think you can set up that feng shui, or basically that buddy work.
So I love what you just said about adjusting your communication to be more effective.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of a program called DISC?
No.
So there's a lot of tools out there.
Okay.
This is a psychometric communication tool.
Is it AI?
Right? Is it what?
Is it AI?
No. I mean, there's AI application you could possibly use. But yeah, so what it is, DISC is one, Myers-Briggs is another, Insights Discovery is another. There's so many. But essentially what DISC does is it teaches you how you communicate. It teaches you how to recognize the signs of other forms of communication, and it teaches you how to adapt and adjust your communication to interact more effectively with others. And it's an acronym. Okay. There's 4 things. It says D is for dominance, I is for influence, S is for steadiness, C is compliance. And, without going into too much detail with it, D, direct, straight to the point. I, more social, a little bit more, hey, let's talk about social things before diving into work.
Okay.
S is a little bit more of a genuine approach. Don't rush me to make a decision. And C, definitely more into the data, the compliance, all those types of things. And these styles are also on the spectrum of introversion and extroversion, for instance, right? Sure. So, for instance, if I'm more dominant and influential, I'm more extroverted in nature. If I'm more compliance-oriented and more steadiness, I'm a little bit more introverted. And there's more that goes along with it, but when you have this knowledge, so for instance, if you and me are communicating and within the first 5-10 minutes, I recognize that you're taking control of the conversation. You're being very straightforward.
Yeah.
You're not really asking me about my family,
Yeah, how did
all that stuff. Okay. You're going straight. So I realize, well, now I need to cater my communication because this is how you prefer. You prefer to communicate. So I'm going to be more straightforward. If I'm having facts I need to present to you, I'm going to be quicker about it. I'm going to let you lead too with additional questions, opposed to on the other side of things, maybe you're more steadiness, right? That high S we call in DISC terminology. You're more genuine. You're trying to take things slower. You're trying to get to know me. You're trying to say, hey, what are some challenges that you had? I know we're going to talk about this initiative, but tell me what your pain points are, right?
Oh, that's perfect. Every healthcare worker in America right now needs that.
Oh, it's huge.
Honestly, if it was just that communication that clearly, even if the hospital system couldn't give you more nurses, couldn't give you more supplies, right? I think just being heard.
Oh, yeah.
Especially being in a female-dominated area, there's 90% females in nursing.
Sure.
Leading very heavy with communication skills. And then a lot of the new nurses are empaths, so they want to feel heard.
That's
they want to feel it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's high S. And that's interesting enough because there's some practices where you're going to find that it's dominated by certain styles, right? And I would imagine nurses, right, they're more supportive, they're more caring, they're trying to help patients, opposed to doctors who might be a little bit more dominant in that nature, saying, hey, I'm going to do some surgery, we're going to chop up your spine, you're going to walk again, bye.
Exactly.
C. That's it.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's certain professions that really, obviously let me refrain. You want to do the profession where you can be your most true self in. So, for instance, if being a nurse requires you to have a high S, right, that genuine energy, that steadiness, more than likely, you're not going to do that if you're more, on that high D where you just want to get in and get out. Or maybe there are certain hospitals and environments where they can condition nurses to do that, where you have to not really give patients the time and the consideration that they need.
And that's that right there, I think, is the biggest pain point, probably in any corporation, because in the healthcare setting, the nurses are that close to the end consumer. Nurses are the product of the healthcare hospital.
Sure.
Like in a tech space, let's just say whoever's closest to the customer is what the representation of the entire system is.
Well, it's interesting, too, because a lot of these styles, and I just mentioned, too, they're actually opposites. And a lot of times I do this program for companies, teams, and all this, and a lot of times you find that employees who have conflict with each other, they're actually opposite styles. So, for instance, high steadiness, hey, don't rush me to make a decision. I want to take my time. Don't push me. Talk to me like a human being. The high D, dominance, hey, I wanted that decision to be made yesterday, and I am going to give you feedback that's very blunt and straight to the point. You may not take it well, opposed to the other two energies as well. The high C, the data, I want to be on my own, be independent. I don't need to necessarily be around people. I'm good with that. And the high I, all I want to do is give you a hug and socialize. And if you give me a whole bunch of facts and details, I notice the butterfly in the corner of the room. I check out. And when you see conflict happen typically on teams, or I'd imagine in hospitals, typically they have the opposite styles. Especially I can see in that, dichotomy I was mentioning, the nurses and the doctors, really.
So it definitely does take high communication skills.
Oh, it does. But I think the challenge is a lot of times people don't recognize that they have to adjust and adapt to the communication of others. Instead, they just have adversarial relationships. They don't get better.
Yeah.
And it makes working conditions more toxic. It makes environments lack psychological safety, where you think, hey, if I do one thing wrong, this person's an asshole.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really difficult to get over it, opposed to just recognizing that, wow, this person's not an asshole. They just communicate differently.
That's the biggest thing. All right, guys, so we have 1 minute left. What would you say to someone who is on the front lines on, let's just say, lower management and has really toxic work environment? What are a few things, just off the top of your head, just tips that they can do to implement change on their level? Do you think
Do
you think they could ask for presenting, or let's just say you have a crazy boss or a crazy nurse manager?
Yeah.
Do you think it would be helpful to present the DISC, like an acronym, to them and say, you know what, I can see that you're right here, but I'm over here, and can we communicate somewhere in between?
So yes, communication is always big, but I think more of that is you have to drop your ego and you have to lead with empathy. So dropping the ego, you see so many times managers on the front line, and I've talked to many managers. I've led a lot of new managers and different types of programs to level them up. A lot of times they say, hey, my boss doesn't listen to me. My direct reports don't listen to me. I'm really frustrated. Or, trying to make change from the top. I can just focus, hey, my boss doesn't listen to me. There's nothing I can do that's going to work. Well, look, you got to give people the benefit of the doubt. Recognize what's going on in your boss's world. If you feel that you're not being heard, yeah, you can adjust your communication style, but also emphasize. What is your boss telling you to do? Why is your boss telling you to do that? Are you doing it? Are you trying to go above and beyond? If your boss is micromanaging you, well, why do you think they're micromanaging you? What if you did more than what your boss asked? Every time that your boss was going to micromanage you or ask a task, you said, hey, I already did it. I also did X, Y, and Z. So you're telling your boss that you don't need to micromanage me because I am already going above and beyond. I did not only what you asked, but I already thought about things that you needed before you needed it.
So going behind the curtain and understanding why they're asking for the things they're asking.
The understanding is the most important. And that is the flip side too. So if I'm a new manager and maybe I have a direct report that's challenging me, good.
Yeah.
Your direct report's challenging you because they care. They care about the flow of the company. Don't admonish them. Listen to what they have to say. And if there's a problem or something that's a challenge that they're upset about, empower them to go do it. Say, hey, you know what? Tell me more. I want to understand your perspective. Listen. And if it is valid, if it's something that should be changed, empower them. And that's the challenge a lot of times new managers have is because, hey, let's say, if I'm going from a role where I was an individual contributor, a single employee, and now I'm managing a team, I want to do everything. I don't delegate. I don't empower. Again, conflict, empower your employees to solve it. Give them goals, and then you don't have to tell them the A, B, and C how to get there. You give them goals, and they tell you how to get there.
That's beautiful.
You're paying them to do this. Flip side of things, the empathy piece is just huge too, because if you build relationships up and down the chain of command, I build a relationship with my boss, and I care about my boss, and what I'm going to do with my boss is I'm going to try to support my boss. If things are going badly, and this works for the nursing world too, I'm going to try to make my boss look good.
Yeah.
If my boss is having a difficult day, maybe they can't come into the office, they can't go on shift, something's going on with the kids. Hey, boss, I noticed you were able. Is there anything I could do to support you while you're out? What does this look like? Who do I need to meet with? Let me have your back. You always try to make your boss look good. And even if your boss, maybe he's failing. Maybe they're making things more difficult for you. Well, look, the overall is if you go above their head and if you say to maybe their supervising manager, hey, they're not delivering, well, look, that may be the case, but that supervising manager isn't going to trust you. They realize that what you do is you go over the head. You don't try to work with your leader and try to help them. You don't try to communicate with your boss and try to understand the gaps and maybe how you can improve that communication.
And so this is beautiful. It works on both sides. It's really just all about caring, empathy, and just increasing love on both sides.
Really
We're all just trying to help each other and push the company to greater heights.
I mean, something that I loved, Tony Robinson, right? Tony Robinson, one of the most influential coaches, a little bit more on the life coaching space. But he said something, when somebody is having a bad day, they lash out at you. So when you see the angry guy who cuts you off, flicks you the bird, cuts you off in the supermarket line, whatever it is, your boss in a working environment, your colleague who's short, who's angry with you, what they're really doing is saying, I need a hug. They're going through something.
I think it was Jay Shetty. People ask for love in the wrong ways. And they ask for help in the wrong ways. But we got to wrap it up.
One thing that Jay Shetty said that I really love, and on that note, when we talk about the differences in communication, Jay Shetty said that our self-perception that we have of each other is actually based on what we think other people think of us. It's not what they actually think of us.
Wow.
It's what we think other people think of us. So much of the time, we assume negative intent. We have to assume positive intent in all situations. And honestly, it makes life a lot easier.
Man, we have to talk about mindfulness and really changing your internal turmoil to be a place of safety inside.
We do.
And then that can be projected outside. But until next time, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
This has been a great show with Alan. Once again, he is a leadership coach for Pinterest. He's worked at Google, a lot of the really big tech companies. And please follow us for more insights on leadership and management.